Australian journalists acted just as predicted when The Voice failed and exposed deep flaws within the Yes campaign to change the Constitution. Instead of acting with contrition and self-reflection, many of our top reporters and media pundits doubled down on the notion that you were too uneducated to appreciate the brilliance of the plan.
The biggest dividing line seems to have been education. So if you are in a seat that had high levels of tertiary education, a bachelor or postgrad, then you were at the very top end of the yes vote. And if you had the lowest levels of tertiary education, you were at the low end of the yes vote. And that's not to say people who are educated know what they're doing and people who don't have tertiary education don't. It's about the style of the message, I think.
The yes vote, if you look at it, has been achieved in places where voters have a bachelor's degree or have better than average wages, and where you find educated people who know, if you've got a bachelor's degree, chances are you know something about government, our structures. You've taken an interest in the kind of way these things happen, not because you're better, but just because you've got the opportunity to have done that. Just to be clear, I'm not judging people's achievements. It's just you've been able to find out lots of information.
Now, let's think about that for a moment. Was education or the lack of education to blame for a low yes vote? The Sydney Morning Herald reports that in just 9 of the nation's 151 seats, more than half the population has at least a bachelor's degree. All, including North Sydney, Wentworth, Canberra, Higgins and Kooyong, voted yes. You can look at this statistic in 2 ways. One interpretation, as Karvelas and Waleed assert, is that high levels of education lead to a greater level of understanding and therefore higher support for yes. But there is another side to the data which highly paid media pundits seem to ignore, or at the very least sidestep. Low education levels are synonymous with lower pay, worse employment opportunities and poorer socioeconomic outcomes. And that goes to the heart of the issue with The Voice. Disadvantage knows no racial boundaries. With cost of living out of control in Australia and many blaming Labor's lack of focus on the issue, there was a perception that the Yes campaign was telling people who are not Indigenous that their struggle was not as important or valid. If you struggle to pay your power bill or buy groceries, The Voice is the last thing on your mind. And that trend was consistent in regional seats across the city. In the North Queensland seat of Kennedy, home to firebrand independent Bob Katter, almost 80% of voters wrote no on their ballot papers. Kennedy includes 25,000 Indigenous Australians, or 14% of the electorate's total population. Parkes in regional New South Wales is also the home to 25,000 Aboriginal and Torres Strait Island Australians, but more than 75% of the electorate voted no. It was a similar situation in Queensland with the seat of Leichhardt and in Western Australia with the seat of Durack. But despite all of this, the media, for the most part, has blamed racism and poor education for the result. Well, joining me on the panel this week is Darren Davidson from The Australian and, of course, the Daily Telegraph's Tim Blair. Darren, thank you for joining me on the desk. It's always been the critical flaw, I think, in the Yes campaign's approach, this elite, almost disparaging, smug approach to people that don't necessarily see the world their way.
Absolutely, I completely agree. I think that it just shows the big mistake that the Prime Minister made, which was not accepting the advice of those around him to seek a compromise. I think that the result just shows that many of the most powerful and wealthiest people in the country are completely out of touch with mainstream voters. And it must be a big wake-up call now for them, that mainstream voters can't be bullied, they can't be bought to conform with whatever the preferences are of progressives in those inner city areas. No one's arguing against, better lives, longer life expectancy, better access to education for Indigenous communities. I think, there was a fundamental disagreement. It was over the model chosen to improve their lives. But yeah, the comments by those media commentators are absolutely ridiculous and really quite insulting and patronising to mainstream Australian voters who are very smart and articulate and well educated and savvy as well.
Tim Blair, what are your thoughts?
Well, it's been fascinating to watch the shift in emphasis from many commentators on the left. Before the vote, we were told repeatedly from the Prime Minister down that that voting yes was just to make a minor change. It was just a bit of a tweak of the Constitution. No big deal. We shouldn't be all that concerned about it. They were saying that while at the same time claiming it would be a big historical sort of leap forward. But now that the referendum's been held, it turns out it wasn't a minor thing at all. It was so major that everyone's got to take a week off to recalibrate and cry about it a lot, which is kind of gives up the lie of that previous minor claim. It's interesting with Waleed Ali's comments especially. If you switch out the word educated and change it to indoctrinated, it makes perfect sense. If you're of the Australian indoctrinated class, if you're indoctrinated in a certain belief system, well, yeah, of course you're going to vote yes. And as with Patricia Karvelas at Radio National, isn't it fascinating? And I'd appreciate maybe Darren's input on this as well. It seems now that the left, having been burned by this result, are actually nudging more towards accepting the idea of voluntary voting. That if you are, in Karvelas's words, someone who's followed the events and is alert to all the nuances of the argument, isn't she kind of suggesting there, Darren, that maybe only those sort of people who can provide maybe evidence of their intelligence when it comes to political matters, that they should be the only ones allowed to vote?
Yeah, Darren, I've seen some people suggest that there should be an age cap, and they were doing so because they were looking at the older populations, people in their 60s and 70s, so forth, and they were seeing the polls that they were overwhelmingly against the referendum. And I saw some young progressive people saying, well, they're not going to be around for much longer. Why would we let them decide the fate of our constitution?
Yep, absolutely. I think they've just completely misjudged the feelings of the nation, and it's really important not to draw the wrong conclusions from all of this, because Jacinta Price has come out really well from this and looks like an inspirational leader for all Australians, as well as Indigenous communities. She's said there must be no return to the status quo, and I think her message really does resonate with mainstream Australians. But to Tim's point, the intolerance of yes campaigners towards anybody they disagree with, I saw that myself. I voted in Kingsford, in Clovelly, at their Surf Life Club. And one of the things I was really interested in spend an hour or two down there with my family and see the no campaigners handing out pamphlets and the reaction of the yes voters. That was actually a majority vote towards the yes vote where I live. And they were just being ignored, and then at times actually experienced really aggressive.
I saw a few middle fingers to no campaigners, and I mean that just tells you everything, doesn't it?